Okay, terrific. So I'm pleased to introduce Tim Campellone, who is the scientific director and head of R&D at Click Therapeutics, and Bailey Willis, who is a clinical trial manager with Click Therapeutics. First of all, Tim is a clinical scientist with research and clinical experience in the treatment of schizophrenia and other mental illnesses. During his career, Tim has helped develop several digital interventions and tools for mental health treatment and assessment. Tim was previously clinical director at Therapeutics, where he worked on the development of their digital therapeutics for schizophrenia. And at Click Therapeutics, Tim oversees the clinical development of digital therapeutics for people with schizophrenia and other serious mental illnesses, and is the science lead for the Click R&D team. And Bailey is a clinical trial manager at Click Therapeutics, where he heads Click's early stage product research program and manages key external research collaborations. Prior to joining Click, Bailey worked within Genentech's port delivery system research program, driving the development of a novel digital diagnostic for wet age-related macular degeneration. Bailey lives in Brooklyn, New York, where he enjoys contemplating the intersection of neuroscience, psychology, and emerging technologies.
Great. Thank you for that introduction. Let me share slides. Okay. Can people see the slides? All right, fantastic. So we're really excited to be here. Thank you for having us, and thank you for taking time to listen to our talk today. So we're really going to be focusing on how kind of our work together kind of in clinical development and clinical operations really helps kind of bridge the gap, if you will, in terms of how we optimize the treatments that we build for kind of this novel modality, which is digital therapeutics. So just to give you an overview of what we're hoping to talk about today, so I'll start by giving you a little bit of a lay of the land of how we build a digital therapeutic, as well as some of the unique considerations that go into evaluating a digital therapeutic. And then I'll hand it over to Bailey to talk more from the operational side of how clinical operations can support digital therapeutic development and really optimize kind of the tried and true development process or evaluation process for what's unique about a digital therapeutic. So before we dive in, wanted to give you some orientation to kind of what Click Therapeutics is, the company that Bailey and I both work for. So at Click Therapeutics, we build digital therapeutics, as our name would suggest. And what a digital therapeutic is really it's a regulated software as a medical device. So for people that are familiar with the regulatory pathways for med device, it's a lot of the same, apparatus that you would have there, but also with the additional considerations that go into software development. And so that means that we are subject to the same regulations and the same best practices and that anyone else would be. So this includes things like FDA oversight, as well as ISO and IEC standards. And at the end of the day, we are still targeting the same kinds of endpoints that you would in traditional drug development, but using software as our treatment. And at Click, we really pride ourselves on our ability to kind of work end to end in terms of developing novel concepts and ways to intervene in particular disease states, going through the validation process of bringing those treatments to people and generating evidence for clinical efficacy and safety, using that evidence to then support registration of our digital therapeutics so that we can now commercialize them and get them into the hands of the people that need them. And just to give you an overview of what our pipeline is, you'll see here that we have a variety of different indications that we're pursuing at different stages of development. So our flagship product is our Clickatine product, which is for smoking cessation. And this is out right now in the world, and people are using it currently to help them as they work towards stopping smoking. And then we have our depression product, which is our next closest, which is going to be now in the pivotal trial phase. And as you see, as you move down here, we have some that are kind of in the early proof of digital concept phase, all the way down to more of what we call our research and discovery phase. And it spans both mental health as well as kind of physical health and chronic medical conditions. So let's start now with what is a digital therapeutic? I mean, many people in this audience may have heard the term, but I wanted to kind of start by kind of differentiating what a digital therapeutic is from everything else that kind of exists in the App Store. So many of us on this call are probably familiar with going into the App Store and downloading an application. And a subset of all the applications that exist are kind of what we call health and wellness apps. These are applications that are built to support people in kind of daily habit formation or kind of just generally changing their lifestyle. But these are not necessarily ones that have been tested to show clinical efficacy or safety and are typically not subject to any sort of regulation. And so what makes a digital therapeutic unique is that these are software applications that have been rigorously evaluated to show that they are clinically efficacious for the indication that they are designed to treat and that they're safe for use. We make sure that the quality of the digital therapeutics is there, so we do rigorous quality software quality testing to ensure usability, comprehension, and that the treatment works as advertised. We also maintain traceability within a robust quality management system. So this means that whether it's a regulatory body or anyone else wants to come in and review what we've done, we have the ability to point to the requirements that went into building the treatments. And lastly, as I mentioned, digital therapeutics are subject to this regulatory review and approval. And really the vision that we have is kind of, looking at the traditional pharmacotherapy prescription pathway and thinking about, a world where we digitize this and where those same touch points with your provider when you go in and talk about a symptom or a challenge you have that would currently lead you to get a prescription for a medication could also be optimized for digital therapeutic delivery, where you go in, your doctor reaches into their bag and would prescribe, in this case, a digital therapeutic, which you can redeem that prescription to gain access to a treatment that's been optimized for clinical integration and can help augment the care that you're already receiving. And so now getting into how we build a digital therapeutic, really at the core of what makes digital therapeutics unique is the cross-functional team that's brought to bear to drive development and evaluation. So for many people here, you're used to kind of the clinical development, clinical operations relationship as being really integral to making sure that we're optimizing how we evaluate our treatments in a way that's going to kind of make sure that we get the data we need to make the claims that we want. With software, there's other stakeholders that are part of this team that are really important and bring unique perspectives to the process. So this includes people like a product manager, your UX designer, engineers, data scientists, software quality engineers, quality management specialists. And these people, and what I think really makes digital therapeutics unique is the ability for this team to come together and really help shape the process at each step. So it's not just a clinically driven process in terms of how we build the treatment to just hit its primary endpoint. It's also how do we build something that people will want to use and fits into their life and takes into account the unique challenges that a given patient population may be experiencing. So it truly is a unique process born of collaboration. And when you think about development of software, versus drug development, the other big thing that jumps out is the speed. Not just in terms of how fast we can go from development to market, but the speed at which development within a treatment can be iterated. And as we collect data, we have the ability with software to quickly put those data back into the development process to continually refine and enhance the treatment's efficacy and just how it fits into people's lives. And so this iterative process is really a core part of a digital therapeutic. So it's contrasted against the more traditional waterfall models that many people here may be familiar with, where you proceed in a serial fashion. And instead, you have the ability to decompose the treatment into kind of discrete components that can be worked on kind of in parallel. So it allows you to test smaller pieces and not have to wait until the entire treatment is built to get feedback from ultimately whether it's our end users as patients or as clinicians, to put that back into the process. So it allows for the ultimate treatment that's built to have been refined at every stage without having the whole treatment to be finished before you can do that kind of formative evaluation. And so this speed really is essential for making the treatment effective and also for making the treatment something that meets the needs and expectations of the end users. And along that last point, I think the thing that as a clinician myself that I enjoy the most about building digital therapeutics is really our ability to partner with people with lived experience at every step of the process. So I think this is something that's truly unique to digital therapeutics, where we don't even have to wait until the development process has begun to start talking with and partnering with people with lived experience. So often what we'll do as a first step is do what we call foundational user research, where before we even come up with a therapeutic concept or understand what we're going to intervene and how we're going to intervene, we want to better understand kind of what's the current standard of care, what are the unmet needs, and really use the voice of the patient to guide our decision making to make sure that ultimately, the TPP that we come up with or the therapeutic concept that we come up with is really best aligned with the needs and expectations of people that we're serving. And then you continue to do this throughout development using that iterative model that I just described previously, where we're constantly generating and testing hypotheses that we are getting from our patient partners as part of this process. And then once you deploy your final treatment into a clinical trial, you have patients that are helping us generate the data that we use to support our claims, but also continuously as we're continuing to refine and evolve that treatment, even after it's kind of in the real world, it's being commercialized, patients become a really important voice for directing this. And one of the things that I think is really promising that's really starting to take root now is similar participatory models being rolled out with clinicians, because ultimately adoption of digital therapeutics is driven by how seamlessly these treatments can fit into existing workflows. And so we can partner with clinicians much in the same way that we can with patients to optimize that process. And when we talk about now evaluation, I think many people in this room are probably familiar, and many of us just in general, given the last year of our lives, probably have gotten comfortable with the concept of remote trials. And I can't think of a better treatment for a remote trial than a digital therapeutic. The ability for software to be quickly downloaded onto your device via the App Store or Play Store means that it's seamless to get people access to treatments. I think enough data has been collected now where we see that these treatments are fairly low risk with fairly limited adverse events. And finally, so much of data collection from digital therapeutics can be done just on the device itself, whether it's engaging and how you use the software to patient-reported outcomes that we can get along the way. So much data collection can be done on the device that it really allows us to have a true window into someone's experience and how they're moving about their day-to-day life. And the nice thing about remote trials in the context of digital therapeutics is, like the digital therapeutic itself being more accessible and overcoming those barriers, remote trials really allow us to continue to increase the inclusivity and generalizability of who can participate in our trials, and thus the data we get when we evaluate our products. And lastly, these remote models are not limited to just the kind of evaluation of the treatment itself. Here at Click, we've been, for the last year, moving all of our user research online and being able to do virtual kind of partnership consultation models where we're able to reach out and talk to people. And what this ultimately allows us to do is make sure that we're sampling, across a wide variety of geographies or other things that really help reduce the bias that we have in our process to make sure that we're truly getting a representative sample in those early stages. And then the last piece I'll say about evaluation of digital therapeutics is something that I learned in graduate school, which is, the treatments that we can build are only as good as our ability to measure our outcomes. And I think digital therapeutics have a unique opportunity to take a different approach to treatment, but also can bring a different approach to how we measure our outcomes. With a digital therapeutic, I think the biggest thing that I've seen is the ability to measure behavior change more granularly. And so looking at the bottom here, you'll see kind of our traditional gold standard approach versus kind of a more digital forward approach, where traditionally we measure behavior change over a certain period of time. And often this can come with certain biases around someone's ability to kind of remember or accurately recall their experiences, or even just bias around kind of how that person's day is going. And what we lose when we measure our outcomes like this is really the ability to understand better what is causing changes in people's behaviors that maybe is leading to worse clinical outcomes, or in some cases, even better outcomes, where maybe we have an opportunity to really reinforce positive behavior change in a way that can improve outcomes for that individual. And then the last thing that's really exciting about digital therapeutics is, with the phone, there are now, with smartphones in general, there are so many sensors that come on the phone that can really produce valuable data that are objective indices of behavior change. And so I love the figure that I put here. It's from a paper from David Moore, I believe in 2017, where he really kind of shows the potential to map individual level sensor data to aggregate all the way up to how you can use these sensors as potential proxy measures of disease states. And so over time, I see a lot of potential and value for digital therapeutics to help revolutionize how we measure kind of outcomes in the context of clinical trials and help us move towards kind of a more holistic understanding of kind of how our treatments work. And now I'll turn it over to Bailey to talk a little bit about kind of how the clinical operations process is optimized for digital therapeutic development.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Tim. So within clinical operations at Click, we have a unique task of combining two well-established and effective product development tracks. On the one side, we've got traditional drug and device development, where we've got established IP. A drug molecule is not going to change from bench to market. We've got long timelines. 6 months is quick in clinical research. And then we've got high spend. I don't need to tell this group that clinical research is expensive. On the other side, we've got traditional software development, which is extremely iterative. I think Tim talked about this, but software engineers will work within these 2 to 4 week development sprints, and they'll regularly produce new iterations. There are short timelines on this side. Software product it's not unheard of for a software product to go from ideation to market in a quarter. And then lastly, there's low research spend here. And yes, there is research done during software development. At the end of each of these 2 to 4 week sprints, an engineering team is going to want to test what they've built. So they're going to conduct user research studies. They'll generate qualitative feedback on the iteration that they're working on. And they're going to do this with the eventual end users of the product. So considering the frequency that they need to do this research and the inherent low risk of software, the cost of running these studies is going to be low, especially when compared to clinical research. So looking at digital therapeutic development, we have the task to combine these tracks. We have to take bits and pieces from both. So I think a big piece of this is working with a clinical population. Our products are intended for patients, and the only way to generate usable qualitative feedback data is to work with a clinical population. And what that means is that at Click, ClinOps is responsible for running these small-scale user research studies. This is also an iterative process. Again, taking from that software development side. What that means for ClinOps is that we've got to have quick research spin up and output. We don't want to be the ones who gate product development. And at the end of the day, we can't get away with a 3-month startup period for every small-scale user research study. And lastly, we've got multiple research goals. So, on one side, from a clinical science perspective, we're going to need to build studies that can effectively evaluate efficacy and safety. And then from a software dev perspective, we're going to need to build studies that are looking for this qualitative user feedback. So really the ideal study that we can build and put together is one that can generate both types of data without compromising the data generated for one side or the other. So again, big takeaway here is that in digital therapeutics, software product development is clinical research. Now I want to take you through the life cycle of a digital therapeutic and kind of show how the clinical science side and the software development side interact. So in the early stage, this is when we've got this early ideation by our science team, Tim and co. They're going to be working to build mechanism of action prototypes with our engineers. And really the research we do here, at least on the clinical science side, is going to be looking for those early efficacy signals, something that is going to inform a decision to push this product forward. This is a time in clinical operations where we can test a lot of new tools. We can do a little bit of experimentation. If there's a new vendor we're interested in, or a new process or tool that we think is fascinating, this is a great place for us to evaluate that in a relatively low-risk way. On the software engineering side, again, they're going to be working primarily to develop those mechanisms of action with the scientists. There's a lot of talk back and forth here between those two teams. Now, this is a stage where we can really we can put these two endpoints together, right? So it's a great place to combine this into a single study. We can take the clinical data endpoints and the qualitative user feedback assessments and smash those together and do what we can to maximize that research return on investment. So then we go to the mid stage. We'll take a solid version of a digital therapeutic. Perhaps it has one or more fleshed out mechanisms of action that have showed some strong efficacy in the early stage. And here we're going to be evaluating that product. We're going to be looking for data that's going to inform a go-forward decision. So that's strong efficacy signal, that's strong, good safety data. And the clinical operations side, this is a place where we can take what we experimented with in the early stages and scale it up a bit and see if it's going to be a good fit for a large-scale pivotal study. Looking at the software dev side, they're going to be looking primarily at the user interface, user experience of the digital therapeutic. But they're going to continue to run these small-scale user research studies, even if it's independent from a study that we run in the mid-stage. They're going to continue to design and iterate and really try to optimize that digital therapeutic for the market. So then we get into the late stage. And I would say that this is probably the closest type of study that will run to a, quote, traditional clinical trial. We'll have sites all around the country. We'll like possibly the world. We'll work with CRO. I think here we're looking to leverage, at least on the clinical collaboration side, we're going to be looking to leverage what we've learned in that early and mid-stage research. So if we had a tool or a vendor or a process that worked really well in early and mid stage, we're going to look to use that in the late stage too. And then over on the software dev side, this is when we're likely going to be looking at design considerations. And this is actually really important. Even though we've got a strong MOA, we've got, the majority of the user interface and user experience ironed out, there are still things that we're going to continue to test and continue to optimize as we close in on that phase 3 study. These could be things like font size and button design. Really important stuff. So some thoughts about how we do all of this. Tim was talking about remote studies, and that's pretty key. We approach all of our clinical research as having remote studies be the standard. I think COVID certainly accelerated industry adoption of remote studies, and that's something we can take advantage of. If we do have a study that requires us to do an in-person assessment, we're going to try and find a way to do that in a way that minimizes the burden on the participant. And I think at this point, we're all looking to do that. But digital therapeutics, what we found is that those in-person requirements are minimal. Digital therapeutics by nature have a lower safety profile, lower risk safety profile. I think the other thing we found is that the gold standard clinical assessments that we use to evaluate the indications that we're chasing right now, we found that those can be done remotely as well, via telemedicine, eCOAs, ePros. I think the other really cool piece here is that we can take data from the digital therapeutic itself. And Tim did talk about this a bit, but a great example of this is adherence data. If we're capturing how often the subject is using the digital therapeutic, if we're capturing that data in our backend, we can port that directly into our clinical database. I do think it's worth calling out here that we would never capture data that a participant hasn't explicitly consented to provide to us. We're not in the business of secret data harvesting. That's not what we do. And then lastly, just coming at this with an open mind. As Tim was saying, traditional clinical research has this waterfall approach, and we try to get away from that a little bit. We'll evaluate each clinical study that we need to run, and we'll look at the components and pieces of a traditional clinical trial. And we'll say, is this something that we absolutely need? Is this something that maybe we can get rid of? Or is this something that we can optimize for the digital therapeutic that we're studying and for the patient population that we're working with? And that's all that I've got. And I think we probably have some time for questions.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Bailey and Tim. We do have one question in the chat that is from Sandy and Bowden. Can you help me understand what, if any, monitoring is done during the development or iterative model? Or is this only a requirement if incorporated into a clinical trial?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's certainly something that we do if it's a clinical trial. I'm assuming by development iterative, you're talking about the small-scale user research that we do. And there is a certain degree of data monitoring there. We have in-house monitors that will look at that data as it comes in and do what they can to clean that. I think we just... I think the takeaway is that we still have a lot of the same requirements for a clinical study, even if it's not looking for efficacy or safety data. So we're still going to be very concerned with quality of data, and so having monitors on hand to review that is important.
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, that's terrific. Anything else from your end, Tim?
No, I'm just happy to have had a chance to talk to all of you and share a little bit about the exciting stuff that we're working on at Click, and hopefully you learn something about digital therapeutics along the way.
Yep. No, thank you very much for your time. This was a terrific presentation, and I really enjoyed it.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for having us. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for joining us, and I will be transferring everyone to the next session. Mr. Christopher Missling with his rare disease presentation.